Robert Redford, then, shall the first present our guest to you? Indeed. Hi there, Ark, how are you? Before I had ever seen a screenplay, I first read about them in the early 1960s, and I thought the tale was fantastic. And I was aware that the headline "Robert Redford has passed away" would wake up the globe one morning. Hollywood heavyweights rush up to share their recollections, tributes flow in, and social media is inundated with movie highlights. Then, though, an intriguing query begins to circulate. Who is not going to be there? Who won't be in the front row for Redford's departure, even if they are a part of his story? That is the start of our story. It was Redford's life, not his death. The man whose visage could sell movie tickets before the trailers even rolled was known as the golden boy of American cinema. Redford was more than just a performer. He was a time. With the Sundance Film Festival, he transformed independent filmmaking into a global dialogue, established careers, and started movements. However, there is one name that is inextricably linked to his legacy beneath the glamour and respect. A man who contributed to the creation of Redford's reputation, but who will never be able to share his farewell curtain call because of fate and strained friendship. Goldman, William. This is not another story of Hollywood success. Ego conflicts, friendship, creative sparks, and the kind of falling out that leaves fans wondering what actually went on behind the scenes of the films we consider masterpieces are all part of it. Let's take a step back, though, before discussing the ramifications, as Robert Redford's narrative is more complex than a single missing funeral seat. It tells the story of how a young Los Angeles youngster became the type of actor and subsequently filmmaker who completely upended the film industry and, despite his success, managed to stay restless and idealistic. Bob, where were you born? Los Angeles is where I was born. On your birth certificate, what is the name? Redford. Charles Robert Jr. Connection between politics, the entertainment sector, and the press. I found the tension that occurs between those three things to be rather interesting when you put them all together. On August 18, 1936, Robert Redford was born Charles Robert Redford Jr. in Santa Monica, California. He came from humble beginnings and, as he admits, wasn't the most easy child. I didn't do well in school. Years later, he said in an interview that he didn't really care about education. He was interested in art, drawing, and finally, the excitement of performing. His early years, however, weren't a direct route to Hollywood fame. His mother passed away when he was only 18, a sorrow that affected him for the rest of his life and, in many respects, motivated him to live an unconventional existence. Redford initially received a baseball scholarship to attend the University of Colorado, but he struggled with classroom discipline. He made a number of mistakes before figuring out acting, including quitting school and touring Europe out of pure curiosity. He gained viewpoint from that detour and those years of walking and observing that would later influence the type of performer. He became someone who was never content with surface and constantly sought out subtleties. He received training at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York after his return to the United States. Films and television appearances followed small-scale stage parts. Although he wasn't immediately well known for his early cinematic work, his skill was obvious. His classic good looks and his ability to play vulnerability without losing strength were a rare combination. Although there were many attractive faces in Hollywood, Redford could add nuanced dimension to a part. By the middle of the 1960s, he began to gain recognition. His role opposite Natalie Wood in Inside Daisy Clover 1965 was one pivotal moment. He was magnetic in addition to being convincing. All of a sudden, the industry realized they were dealing with something unique. However, his pivotal time in his career was rapidly approaching. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid blew up theaters in 1969. The studio had originally intended for Steve McQueen to play opposite Paul Newman, but McQueen left, and the management weren't in a rush to get Redford to take his place. They believed he was too unknown and unbankable. This is when fate intervened. Redford was demanded by Paul Newman himself. Decades later, Redford said, "He changed my life. Steve McQueen was what the studio wanted. Marlon Brando was what they wanted." However, Paul stated, "I would like to accompany Redford." In addition to giving us one of the best buddy movies ever made, that choice solidified Newman and Redford's relationship for life. life. With its humor, contemporary pacing, and anti-hero charm, the film became a success and redefined the Western genre. The duo was adored by audiences, Redford as the more reserved, introspective Sundance Kid, and Newman as the witty Butch. It was the ideal opportunity to display Redford's skills, charm balanced with a hint of self-reflection. On screen, he was more than simply the golden boy. He was the type to hint at secret depths, maybe a hint of mystery. Redford's career took off after Sundance. His roles in the 1970s were All the President's Men, 1976, Jeremiah Johnson, 1972, The Sting, 1973, reuniting with Newman, and The Way We Were, 1973. His range grew as each role built upon the one before it. With equal conviction, he could portray tough outdoor enthusiasts, cunning scammers, or investigative reporters. His decisions demonstrated a careful balancing act. Yes, he aspired to be a star, but he also wanted to be a purposeful artist who did more than just perform on screen. Redford has goals in mind. Early in the 1980s, he transitioned to directing. Additionally, Ordinary People marked his directing debut in 1980. He won the Academy Award for Best Director for the critically acclaimed film. It demonstrated that he was more than just a good-looking guy who got lucky with good scripts. As a filmmaker, he has depth and vision. However, his most enduring legacy may have been an institution rather than a particular film. Redford established the nonprofit Sundance Institute in 1981 with the goal of assisting independent filmmakers. That gave rise to the Sundance Film Festival, which would serve as the springboard for innumerable careers. Darren Aronofsky, Steven Soderbergh, Quentin Tarantino, and numerous others. Redford's dedication to providing a forum for voices outside the studio system changed American filmmaking in ways that still have an impact today. Redford maintained an oddly secluded life despite his notoriety. Usually, he wasn't the most boisterous celebrity present. He favored causes, nature, time, and meaningful labor. He supported Native American rights and environmental causes. He previously remarked, "I feel like there's something I should be doing to give back, so I've been plagued by guilt all my life." A large portion of his life outside of film was governed by this sense of duty. Redford had long since cemented his place in Hollywood history by the time he announced his retirement from acting in 2018 with The Old Man and the Gun. He was one of the few people who could be called both an activist and a star, without contradiction. Despite his illustrious career, Redford's tale would be lacking if he did not acknowledge the individuals who influenced his course. And it leads us back to William Goldman, one man in particular. Goldman provided the words if Redford provided the charm. Goldman offered the world a memorable dialogue if Redford gave it Sundance. Their bond was strong, life-changing, and occasionally extremely complex, which brings us full circle to that vacant chair at Redford's fictitious funeral. Because it's necessary to delve into one of the most intriguing collaborations in Hollywood history to comprehend why Goldman, or rather, why Goldman's presence would be absent when William Goldman and Robert Redford first met. I can't do this forever, you know. Since I was 21, I have been doing it. It's difficult for me to hear you say, "Hey, that's enough, when you enter your 80s. He most likely had no idea that he had just met a man whose remarks would go down in movie history. The visage that spectators loved the most might have been Redford. However, Goldman was the one who created the framework for the personas Redford would play. They worked together in a way that was equal parts magic and mayhem. As is the case with many great Hollywood partnerships, Goldman wasn't just some screenwriter attempting to break into the business. He had already achieved some literary fame. He attended Oberlin College to study English before attending Columbia University. He was born in Highland Park, Illinois in 1931. Prior to transitioning into screenwriting, he had published novels such as Boys and Girls Together in 1964 and A Temple of Gold in 1957. Goldman was already well known as a poet by the middle of the 1960s. However, his career took a huge turn in 1969 when he submitted a screenplay that was repeatedly rejected before it made movie history. The Sundance Kid and Butch Cassidy. That script didn't look like the westerns Hollywood was accustomed to, since it was lighthearted and irreverent. Goldman penned dialogue that was humorous, sardonic, and almost cheeky, in contrast to the somber and muscular tone of classic westerns. At first, studio executives were perplexed, but the concept picked up steam once Redford and Paul Newman became involved. Redford's presence, Newman's magnetism, and Goldman's words were like lightning in a bottle. Butch Cassidy's success was revolutionary. It launched Redford into prominence and earned Goldman an award for Best Original Screenplay. Beyond the accolades and box office results, however, it marked the start of a collaborative partnership that would shape the careers of both men. Goldman has created witty yet flawed, tragic yet humorous characters. Redford knew how to portray the inconsistencies on screen. The alchemy was uncommon. Goldman wasn't being humble when he famously remarked, "Nobody knows anything," in reference to the unpredictability of the film industry. He was telling it like it was. There is no surefire recipe for success in Hollywood. However, for a while, it appeared like Redford and Goldman had figured it out. The strength of their partnership would be demonstrated in the 1970s. The President's Men were the bonfire if Butch Cassidy was the spark. The American public was still reeling from the Watergate crisis. Redford, who was always a political thinker, made a bold decision when he purchased the rights to Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein's book. Although political thrillers weren't particularly popular at the box office, Redford still had faith in the genre and hired Goldman to write the screenplay. This is where the intriguing part began. Although Goldman was known for his incisive communication and solid organization, the President's Men were all cunning. With two reporters exposing the most startling political scandal in American history, the story was extensive. It wasn't easy to condense all of that into a 2-hour film. Goldman struggled with drafts, trying to strike a balance between suspense and information. Ultimately, he created an expertly written script that successfully transformed investigative journalism into suspenseful drama. For instance, Goldman is credited with coining the now famous term, "follow the money." Although the line was never used in Woodward and Bernstein's actual reporting, it ended up being the movie's catchphrase and eventually becoming a part of American culture. That was Goldman's power. He had the ability to condense history into one sentence that viewers would never forget. In contrast, Redford's role in the movie went beyond simple acting. He played a significant role in forming it. His portrayal of Bob Woodward, who was positioned opposite Dustin Hoffman's Carl Bernstein, encapsulated the quiet resolve of a young reporter seeking the truth. Redford's on-screen persona and Goldman's words combined to make what may have been a dull political drama into one of the decade's most captivating movies. The film was a success. It won 4 Academy Awards and established Redford and Goldman as Hollywood titans. It was confirmation for Goldman that his keen intuition could not only amuse, but even shape civilization. For Redford, it demonstrated that his career might represent something far more significant integrity than mere matinee idol appearances. It wasn't just the success, though, that made their collaboration so intriguing. It was the fundamental chemistry between two men who couldn't be more different. Blonde, attractive, and reticent, Redford is frequently approached with an air of mystery. Goldman was a storyteller who never held back his ideas. He was humorous, forthright, and occasionally prickly. Similar to their work, their bond featured conflicting components that nevertheless made sense. Goldman's analysis of Redford was nuanced and not always flattering. Hollywood, according to Goldman's memoir Adventures in the Screen Trade, is a place full with egos and shaky connections. While praising Redford's instincts as an actor and producer, he also alluded to the difficulties of collaborating with someone who is so involved. Redford wasn't the kind to simply arrive, recite the lines, and walk away. He tried to mold and shape the project, which occasionally annoyed Goldman. Nevertheless, because they both had a strong passion for storytelling, their collaboration endured despite sporadic disagreements. They had no interest in meaningless show. Their goal was to tell meaningful stories, whether it was two journalists pursuing corruption at the highest levels of government or two criminals attempting to escape their fate. Redford was thoughtful, even nostalgic, in his remarks following Goldman's passing in 2018. "I am sorry to learn of his loss. We had a lengthy past together. It wasn't mushy, but it showed that Redford understood the value of their relationship. Their relationship was more than just a project. The careers of Goldman and Redford, aside from Butch Cassidy and the rest of the President's Men, appear to follow a similar trajectory, constantly revolving around themes of human conflict, myth, and truth. Redford frequently addressed the loss of trust or the degradation of innocence in his own directing endeavors. Although there was a similar understanding of human weakness in Goldman's screenplays, there were fissures developing beneath the public's regard. Goldman's sensitivity to ownership and credit is well known. In one interview he remarked, "Screenwriters don't get respect. If the movie works, it's the director. If it fails, it's the writer." Stories of rewrites and arguments over All the President's Men would come to haunt his partnership with Redford. But for the time being, Redford and Goldman were a formidable partnership in the gilded radiance of the 1970s. They were the pinnacle of what Hollywood could produce when talented actors and incisive writing came together. After redefining a genre with their buddy western, they transformed political reportage into suspenseful drama. That's a resume that few partnerships in movie history can claim. However, as is the case with many great partnerships, theirs was bound to be put to the test. Because if the tale of All the President's Men was the story of truth, and Butch Cassidy was the story of loyalty, then the story of ego, ownership, and the occasionally unpleasant realities of creative collaboration was what came next. Now to core of their story, where awe turned to tension, cooperation to conflict, and Goldman's voice, so vital to Redford's legacy, became progressively softer until it seemed to vanish completely. That's excellent. Before ever seeing a screenplay, I first read about them in the early 1960s. I adored the plot and realized that it was time to address the core of the tale. William Goldman is the one performer, or in this instance, writer, that we won't be watching on the day of Robert Redford's farewell, and the explanation is straightforward: he's already gone. At the age of 87, Goldman lost his fight with pneumonia and colon cancer to death in November 2018. Therefore, even though the wording suggests that Goldman had a falling out so bad that he would not attend Redford's funeral, the truth is that he is no longer able to do so. This is where the subtlety enters the picture. It's unclear if he would have shown at all, even if he were still living, because the once golden, brilliant, and intensely cooperative friendship between Redford and Goldman didn't exactly end well. In interviews, Goldman acknowledged didn't exactly end well. In interviews, Goldman acknowledged his early admiration for Redford, describing him as the sole candidate for the role of Sundance in Butch Cassidy and The Sundance Kid. However, Goldman wasn't afraid to admit that Redford might be challenging. He reportedly remarked, "Redford had that thing. He was golden. You looked at him, and you knew he was destined to be a star." Redford, who had strong opinions about his characters, was not an exception to Goldman's famously direct memoir, Adventures in the Screen Trade, 1983, which detailed how performers, including his friends, could be controlling about scripts and roles. After All the President's Men, 1976, the tension began to rise. Redford had taken the lead on that project, hiring Goldman to adapt Woodward and Bernstein's book and optioning the rights. It appeared to be another successful formula on paper: Goldman plus Redford equals gold. But it was a tumultuous process. Goldman subsequently stated that Redford's insistence on numerous modifications made the writing one of the most challenging of his career. In order to make the movie about the system rather than just the reporters, Redford even lobbied for scenes that changed the focus. Goldman pushed back, a stickler for narrative clarity. Although Goldman's work ultimately earned him an Academy Award, his friendship with Redford never entirely recovered. Goldman's later joked that Hollywood was a place where your friends could become your foes over a line of phrase is telling. He indicated that the arguments became personal with Redford. Would Goldman attend the burial if he were still living when Redford finally passed away? That's the type of intriguing hypothetical scenario that Hollywood adores. On the one hand, Redford might be drawn there out of appreciation for his accomplishments. However, he might avoid him due to the unresolved sting of their professional divorce. And you could argue that the same holds true here. As Goldman famously remarked of Hollywood, "Nobody knows anything. It is unknown if Goldman would have visited in person to pay his respects." He won't be there in death, though, that much is clear. What does this leave us with, then? Exploring the tale of William Goldman and Robert Redford, it appears to be the story of two titans of Hollywood whose careers intersected at crucial junctures. One was the acting prodigy who transformed American filmmaking by founding and directing Sundance. The other was the author who provided us with phrases that are still used in popular culture. Together, they produced art that helped define a time period. However, it also serves as a reminder that creative collaborations are frequently untidy. They begin with passionate outbursts and a common goal. However, cracks emerge as egos, aspirations, and artistic differences intrude. The wounds never fully healed for Redford and Goldman. Nevertheless, there is no denying their relationship. Redford might not have had Sundance if it weren't for Goldman's pen. Goldman's script might have sat there collecting dust if Redford hadn't been such a star. Butch Cassidy's The Sundance Kids and All the President's Men's names are inextricably interwoven, and neither death nor a damaged friendship can take away that. Redford discussed how teamwork influenced his career in one of his final interviews. Films are never about a single individual. There is usually a mix of individuals that contribute something. And the chemistry works, if you're lucky. Even if the relationship with Goldman didn't continue long, when it did, it was pure magic. Goldman, on the other hand, has written about the unpredictable nature of Hollywood relationships. Life hurts. Anybody who says otherwise is trying to sell something. It was his way of expressing that nothing is simple, not even in glitzy Hollywood, and the story of Redford Goldman demonstrates that. Goldman will therefore not be present in person when Robert Redford's last curtain comes down. He will be, however, in a sense, as every homage to Redford will unavoidably bring to mind All the President's Men, Sundance, and Butch Cassidy. And Goldman's fingerprints are just as evident in those movies as Redford's. Their friendship blazed brightly, died out, and left behind a creative fire that continues to illuminate movie theaters. It's what makes movies so beautiful. Even broken friendships can leave a lasting legacy. And it might be the best form of immortality in Hollywood. Guys, that's it. What do you think then? Was Hollywood ego at work, or was their friendship doomed from the beginning? Leave a comment below with your opinions. Remember to press the bell, like, and subscribe so you don't miss another tale like this one.